weekly holiday worth celebrating.
Hello there, Internet. Mogwai here, and I got another episode of Progress Day for you, aka the only holiday worth celebrating. I kind of butchered that, but whatever. I'm here joined by Panda and Petrify. Before I introduce Petrify, I'm gonna explain why we haven't been uploading this podcast recently. I did promise it was gonna be a weekly thing, but talking with Panda a few weeks back, we decided to make it a bi-weekly podcast so we would have more stuff to talk about. And obviously coronavirus happened. You know, we're all dealing with this, and this affects us as well. As the reason why Merchant will not be joining us today is because he is sick. I'm not sure if he has the virus, but he's been sick for a little bit over a week. He's doing fine. He's getting better. You know, in case you guys want to give him some support, head over to his channel and, you know, say, get well, Merchant. Love you. And and to substitute Merchant here, we got my boy Mark, aka Petrify, who is a pro card game player. He's been in the scene for a long time and is actually a developer now in his own card game in charge of Balance, Gods Unchained. Petrify also made it to #1 NA in Legends of Runeterra. He's been grinding the game like crazy, so he has a lot to say, and I thought he would be a great substitute for today. And of course, I got my dad here, Panda, who's back at it. He did a Reddit post in which he did a community survey, which talking about all sorts of things, and we'll be covering that in today's podcast as well. Today's podcast we got a lot of stuff to talk about. Like, we got to focus on the balance changes that happened from balance 0.92 and the patch start. And then we got to talk about the economy changes as well. So it's going to be a good one. So yeah, say hello, guys. I'm done with my intro here.
Rap God, that was quite the intro.
The 4-minute intro. Yeah. A short one, guys. But yeah, we got delayed, obviously. So we're going to talk about the last patch and the patch that happened, well, today, I guess, or whenever you see this a few days ago. Obviously, yeah, because of the delay, there'll be a lot to talk about regarding balance and also kind of the future of the game and the economy change, which are major changes going forward.
Say hello, Mark.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for having me, guys. I really enjoyed the first episode, and I think I messaged Mogwai. I was like, man, you got to get me on here one day. I got so much to talk about, not just from a player perspective, but also from someone who balances the game and works in the game. A lot of thoughts about Runeterra, and I'm excited to share them.
Awesome, sweet. So we're gonna just hop on to the first subject, which is going to be the big patch. Well, it was supposed to be the biggest patch up until now, patch 0.92, which is the balance patch, in which a lot of stuff got changed, and we're going to be talking about, I think we're going to start off with Hecarim, and we'll just be going over the big major changes. And like, now that time has passed, because normally we would talk about this with a first impression sort of perspective, right? But now, it's been a while. We've been able to play with the cards, and we've been able to experience the buffs and the nerfs, and have somewhat of an idea as to how impactful they've been. And I think Hecarim is definitely the first one to talk about. He's been the dominant champion in Runeterra for quite some time, and he took quite the hit. What do you guys think about the ultimate changes to Hecarim?
Yeah, so I think it's like always scary when you double nerf a card, because not only do they lower the health, they lowered the attack of the specters. So I was expecting this to be like very, very weak compared to before, and I think it hasn't been too bad. Like, I think it's in a nice spot. But definitely for me, the most noticeable thing has been the attack decrease on the riders, because now I can actually block those riders with stuff and not take the damage, whereas before, usually you had to like throw away a unit when blocking those riders. Yeah, so I think Hecarim's in a pretty good spot right now. He's not amazing, but not as overpowered as he was.
Yeah, and the decrease from 3 attack to 2 attack means a lot in terms of survivability for your blocking units, like in the mid game normally. So I think it's a 1 point difference, but it's a huge difference actually when it comes to having blockers for the next round, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a big difference, I think, for sure. I was hoping for more of a, not so much like a numbers change, but more of inherent change to how Hecarim works, because I don't think he's that much of like ephemeral payoff. Like, he's not a unit that you say, oh, I'm making an ephemeral deck, I'm only going to play Hecarim in this deck. He was kind of splashed into every deck because he's just good value. So I don't know how they would end up doing that. They did change the number of units you need for him to level up, but I think, right?
Yeah,
Mageseeker.
what I actually like a lot about this change personally is the the double-edged sword approach that they took at it, right? Like they're like, okay, you know what? We're gonna nerf Hecarim. We know Hecarim is in every Shadow Isles deck under the sun. He is an incredibly powerful 6-mana play, and he doesn't really require much support or synergy to, actually work out well, right? So they took this facet away, but they wanted to make sure to enhance the synergy with ephemerals, and the buffs in regarding ephemeral synergy were actually pretty significant. Not only did he receive the Yasuo treatment by losing out on one extra ephemeral attacker required for him to level up, he also gives +3 attack to all ephemeral units now, which is definitely very, very impactful. The issue with this ability, though, and through my experience, as of course I tried all sorts of different ephemeral decks around Hecarim, is that when Hecarim goes down in the combat phase, these buffs dissipate, right? And a lot of times he's always first, because all these ephemerals that you're spawning, the riders, the sharks, if you're playing sharks, etc., they come after him. So they fight after Hecarim. So if Hecarim is blocked and killed, or for example, you can't actually Mark of the Isles him to get like a bigger hit off, because if he dies, then all of a sudden the buffs go, and this is really impactful. I think this is one of the big issues that Hecarim has as an ephemeral sort of finisher or payoff, like you said, Panda. Because otherwise, I think this buff is really significant. It goes a long way, man. If when you go for a full attack with Hecarim in the late game with an ephemeral deck, and you get all those riders +3 attack and the sharks, it gets crazy. And I've seen people argue that his home is in an Ionia shell with Dawn and Dusk, because Dawn and Dusk is actually pretty damn powerful with Hecarim, and if you manage to keep that first Hecarim alive, then the other ones will have ephemeral and they'll have overwhelm, right? So it'll be a crazy hit. But it's definitely, I've yet to see ephemerals as an archetype actually make a decent splash in the meta. I think I don't know exactly what's holding them back. Some people were very scared about Shark Chariot, I remember, in the early stages. I mean, they gotta shoot. I'm gonna go with some shots fired at Merchant, who said, the card was super broken. Now they can't defend themselves, and it turns out it wasn't that great. It's lacking. The archetype is lacking.
Yeah, I think the main issue with ephemerals that I found is they're just so bad at blocking. There's not really any good ephemeral blocker on curve. Like, you have the 2/3 that makes other ephemerals bigger, which is okay, but you don't really want to block with that because you need it to keep it alive because it's an engine. And then before that, Hecarim was the only good blocker, but now he's a bit worse because he's only a 4/5 for 6 mana. So yeah, it's a bit like the inverse of Elusives, where Elusives can kind of chump block all day. Ephemerals can't even block. That's been my problem with them anyway. I do think that one of the other problems with ephemerals right now is the finisher that they previously had was the Harrowing. Yeah. And that got a bit of a stealth nerf. Could
you explain exactly, for people who are watching, because this is something that definitely flew under my radar. I didn't notice this until.
Yeah, so it no longer resurrects enemy creatures, which wasn't actually mentioned in the patch notes. And a lot of the time, you would, for instance, you take your opponent's Ash, you'd take your opponent's Karma, something like that, and it'd be very useful. But now you're only really getting a couple of Hecarims and then just, random junk. Yeah. If you're building in an ephemeral deck, and it's significantly worse, I've found. I thought it would actually be better because it guaranteed me getting Hecarim, but I found it to be a lot worse. So ephemerals, in my opinion, right now is, fairly garbage. Unfortunately.
Yeah. It sucks. Hey, speaking of fairly garbage, how do you guys feel about Kalista? I mean, Kalista, I was super excited because I know you guys know preview beta Kalista. God, she was such a cool card. Really, in case you guys don't know, old Kalista, before the open beta happened and before she was nerfed in the preview beta, was a 3-mana 4/2 with Fearsome, that upon entry bonded with an ally. And what happened with that bond is that any damage that Kalista would take, the bonded ally would take for her. Then once 3 allies died, she would level up, and as she attacked, she would resurrect the bonded ally, who would again take damage for her. Now, the reasoning behind this nerf was one that I did not like a lot at all. Like, I was actually pretty upset when this happened. They basically nerfed Kalista, and the reasoning they gave it is because she was too complex, too complicated, and people didn't understand how she worked, and it confused a lot of newer players, and they undid that. They Riot expressed their regret towards that change, and I've seen numerous times one of the lead balance designers mentioned how they were reworking Kalista, but they wanted to make sure that she didn't impact the metagame too much because Shadow Owls was already in a very strong spot. So bringing her back in that stage could prove to be a bit too much for the region at the moment, considering how the other ones were. And eventually they led to this rework. And my big issue with it is that you have to go through a lot to have 4 allies die in her presence. Because you may think, comparing her to Thresh, well, it's 4 versus 6, but Thresh counts the opposing units as well. Like, any unit dies, right? With Kalista, it has to be exclusively allies. So you have to kill 4 allies. And then the payoff, she's just like a bit of a glorified Zed. And in a lot of situations, a worse one at that, unless you have a really big, beefy unit to resurrect, because when she's chump blocked, if the blocker kills the ephemeral unit, you are preventing... Yeah, she's preventing damage for herself. I guess she's like giving herself a barrier. That's basically all she's doing, right? And I haven't found the way to really... I haven't found the big payoff with her. Like, every deck that I designed around her just ended up being better with Lucian. You know, so... Or Lucian and Hecarim, right? It's... I don't know. She's underwhelming, at least in my eyes.
I think the big difference is when you mentioned the preview patch, I also played that kind of deck a lot with the Undying and the Curse Keepers. It worked so well because her initial ability made it so that your units would die, and they wanted to die. Like the Undying, they can't block, so then they would kind of be forced to block. You would get the Undying stats for the next turn, and you would have a unit die. So it was the whole process was synergistic. Yeah. Whereas now, sure, there is self killing archetype in SI.
Yeah,
but you're not getting that same payoff, I guess, in a way. It's there's not that same synergy. So that makes it much more awkward. And it's 4 allies as well instead of 3, so that's quite a bit more. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it is a good card once it levels up, but it feels awkward to level up and then to get the value from it. And the fact that it's a 4/3 with Fierce, I'm sure that's great, but it's not really that.
It's a lot of work. A lot
still
of
quite fragile for what it is.
Yeah.
I would definitely prefer if they swapped her stat line around so she was a 3/4. Because then, she's not as fragile as a body. The stat line is appealing right now with Fearsome, but what it basically says is if Kalista gets blocked, she dies. Because she has Fearsome, she can only get blocked by things with 3 attack.
Yeah.
So she just dies, right? So you play a 3-mana card, and then a lot of the time you can't even attack with her until she levels up, and it just feels really bad.
Yeah.
I view her kind of as a combo card right now. I feel like we haven't found the best use with Kalista, and I wouldn't be surprised if we do end up finding something really good. Resurrecting the strongest ally is a really important aspect. It is the strongest one. So I think late game there might be some really cool combos, but we just haven't really found it yet, at least right now. But I agree that she is pretty underwhelming.
Oh, I agree completely with that. I've thought about a lot of really neat concepts with her, right? For example, resurrecting Tiana Crown Guard in Demacia. There are some big plays with units, late game units that have summoning effects, right? It's very important to pay attention to those things when you're building a deck in Runeterra. There's a big difference between a play effect that develops a skill, or a play effect in general that requires you to play the card from your hand, and a summon effect. When it says when I'm summoned, it's much easier to abuse. Rekindler is another example of that, right? The first thing that people thought about is, how Kalista could spawn the Rekindler, and that could revive Kalista, and, you could start filling up your board that way, right? But I found this one underwhelming because it clogged up your board if you had a decent board state, you would actually just kind of like lose the Kalista anyways. But there are some neat combos out there. I personally just think the requirement is a bit too. I wouldn't mind seeing her at like back to like 3 allies dying. But honestly, like being completely honest, I miss the old Kalista. I just wish they could tweak that one, because there was like what Panda said is exactly that. Like not only with the Undying but with the Curse Keeper as well. Like there was some really neat shit you could do with her, and
I mean, it was essentially like the champion for that archetype.
Exactly.
Like the same way Hecarim should work for ephemeral. You played that deck and you played Kalista, and it felt super good. Like it felt the synergy was there on all accounts. Whereas now it's like, sure, there's like if you do this, you'll get the level up, but that process of doing that, having 4 allies die, there isn't any synergy there, so it doesn't feel as good, and doesn't feel like everything is meshing as well as it should. I think that goes to like, that's an archetype satisfaction kind of thing, that players should be able to play a certain type of strategy and have everything feel like it's gelling properly and like everything has synergy. Whereas here there's like a bit of a disconnect, and it makes it, you know, a bit awkward to play, I think.
The one that everyone was initially excited about before they realized it didn't work was They Who Wander, I think, or They Who Endure. I can't remember. I always get the two.
The 10 mana one, right?
No, the other one, the 6 mana one. Everyone
They Who Endure, yeah, because it's a 1/1 in the graveyard. Yeah.
So it never actually gets resurrected.
Yeah. Oh, that sucks. Yeah. So speaking of Kalista, or at least Kalista related cards, Black Spear. Like this one really shocked me, honestly. Like Black Spear from 2 mana to 3 mana. I don't think this was warranted. I think you could justify like Glimpse Beyond and even Vile Feast over this. I felt this nerf was completely unnecessary, and in many decks it has actually killed the card, though I still feel like Black Spear does find its home in more like control oriented Shadow Owls decks. Like I've been messing around with some, like with Thresh and Anivia, and I found use for this because it's still like deal 3 damage to a unit, which is pretty key, right? There's a lot of neat things you kill, but this nerf, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think it was necessary personally.
I kind of liked it. Like I hated playing around Black Spear in the early game.
Yeah,
it really drove me nuts, to be honest, because I was playing a lot of Fiora in the previous patches, and God, Black Spear just made me go crazy. Like it's kind of like if they have 2 mana up, then you're just like, well, I'm gonna lose my Fiora. But I agree that it was probably a bit harsh. Like they might have just been on the safer side here because everyone is complaining so much. They could make it deal 4 right now, and I don't even know if it would see a lot more play. I can't remember the last time someone played this against me, actually.
Yeah.
Since the nerf, it's been very underwhelming at 3 mana. Very underwhelming.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, it wasn't anything that anyone was complaining too much about. Like it wasn't like Glimpse Beyond. Like, we can see on like the ratings later as well. The community has. It wasn't really mentioned even, but I think they kind of saw like, okay, Shadow Owls is very strong as a region. Who's going to take the hit? All right, it's going to be Black Spear. So Black Spear kind of was the sacrifice, I think, to make the region as a whole a bit weaker and not have so many options when it comes to removal and all these different, you know, at very low mana as well. But yeah, I think it was, I mean, it was annoying, but it wasn't too overpowered. It was just strong and obviously very good value, of course. But now it's a bit underwhelming, yeah. Unless you're playing, I guess it is now just a control card. If you're playing control, then maybe you'll run 2 of them. But in other decks, it's not like an auto-include anymore.
Yeah, the problem I found with playing this in control is like not a lot of your stuff is dying like to trigger it. Yeah. I think the best time I've ever had with Black Spear so far has been like getting it randomly off of Karma and then just like throwing away something and then dealing 6 with it from Karma. But like you can replace Black Spear then with anything, and it works well.
I mean, when I'm like talking about control, I'm referring to, like, for example, I played in my Thresh and Anivia deck with like the Curse Keepers and Ravenous Butchers and the Chronicler of Ruin. I should have specified a bit more. Obviously, this card in like a Spooky Karma sort of deck doesn't really make much sense for sure, because you want this card. Like that's why I don't like this nerf, is because I feel like this card, you know, it is synergy. Like it requires synergy. It fits specific decks that revolve around self-sacrifice, even though it may not be like the full focus of the deck itself. It's not nearly, or it wasn't nearly as auto-include as Glimpse Beyond and Vile Feast were. So I felt like to punish the more synergistic card, I don't know. I don't think it was the right call, but at the same time, it is true what you said, Mark, about like Black Spear at 2 mana was really powerful. Like, I remember playing in the tournament. I ran into Zed a lot, who was playing a deck with the Undying, and he had a full set of single combats in Black Spear. Oof. And his removal was insane. Like naturally he always had an answer for everything. I developed. I was playing Heimerdinger too. Heimerdinger dies to Black Spear, so it was like, okay, my Heimerdinger dies to like 6 2-mana cards that he has in his deck, right? So it was really strong in that sense. So I guess maybe it's a card that could potentially become more and more problematic as they introduce more cards in the future. Like I could see that happening because for 2 mana 3 damage, if it becomes easier and easier to enable, is super efficient. So maybe in that sense it did make sense. So
yeah, I still would have preferred them to nerf Glimpse Beyond from like a color pie perspective. Yeah. Like Shadow Isles has like a lot of really good removal, right? That's kind of their theme, is a ton of good removal. And they don't have any draw spells except for Glimpse Beyond, which is the best draw spell in the game. So that's like the weird thing to me is like, why do they have Glimpse Beyond when they don't have any other way to draw? So it's it's weird.
Not only that, but changing the mana on like Glimpse Beyond, for example, it's a card that you use sometimes in the early game, but it's more a card you you have like a lot of leftover mana anyway. So it would be a nerf, but not as big as a nerf from 2 to 3, whereas Black Spear, because it's more of an early game card, the jump from 2 to 3 is massive. Like it breaks the card. Yeah. Whereas with Glimpse, is like when you use it, you have leftover mana anyway. So sure, it's a nerf. You can't use it early game as much, but late game it's kind of the same. Yeah. So it's more like a lesser nerf. Whereas with Black Spear, it kind of killed the card in many archetypes, I think.
Yeah, completely agree. Let's move on and talk about the MVP of the patch notes. The Border Lookout becomes the Vanguard Lookout, and he's an elite. And this is actually bad because when you pull a random elite from the Lancer, when you pick up this guy, you're like, what the fuck? Get out of my head. What is this?
This was definitely a nerf.
Like, it makes sense though. I mean, comparing it to other cards, like the stat line, and yeah, I think it's just adding that little bit of elite better for the card itself, but maybe worse for like the archetype in general because of what Mogwai said.
Yeah. So let's move on to the Mageseekers. Now, I love these because this is not a buff or a nerf. This is a complete redesign of 3 cards. The Mageseeker Insider, the Investigator, and the Persuader. And I absolutely love these cards. I've been building a lot of decks around them, and I found them to be just so much better than before. Like before, they didn't really make much sense, but now it's just like there's so many cool things you can do with them. I built a Lux Karma variant. I built a Lux PNZ with Illegal Contraption and more like a mid-range deck with Unstable Voltation even and all that. And they're just really satisfying to play. I think they're well balanced, and I don't know about you guys, but I love these changes.
Yeah, I was really happy when I read these changes. Like I had these 3 cards as like amongst the worst 3 in the entire game beforehand. And now they're not like the best cards, but they're pretty good, and they just feel really nice. Like I'm very happy with these changes. I hope that this is the direction they move in more often.
Yeah, a lot of nerfs and buffs, people just think about numbers and think about add an attack here or change this, but sometimes cards need total reworks, and people could tell like there was this archetype in Demacia that no one was playing, that no one even knew existed, and now suddenly a new archetype exists. So someone that wants to play kind of more of a spell-focused Demacia with Lux, etc., has a chance to. So I think it's a textbook example of what a good rework is. Like not even a buff or a nerf, but just a change to make a certain like part of the region playable all of a sudden.
Yeah. The big one for me was the Insider. I think that card, it was the discard a spell to grant power equal to its cost. Whenever I read that, I was like, this is just absolutely rubbish. So I'm very happy they changed that card. And I'm happy with how quickly they did it too. Like the fact that they identified, all right, nobody's playing this, let's just redo it like this fast is a really promising sign.
Yeah. I love how you can like I love how it enables this sort of like mid-range archetype, and you have like these strong big statted bodies that you can capitalize on with barriers and with single combats, amongst other things. The Mageseeker Persuader is a really nice follow-up play to, because obviously what this what these cards want. And the reason why a lot of people like combining them with Piltover and Zon is because you want to have that turn 3 6-mana spell, proactive spell, like Remembrance or the Illegal Contraption, right? And after you go for this, you have this turn 3 play, either a turn 4 Mageseeker Insider, 4-mana 6/5, or even a turn 4 Mageseeker Persuader with backup mana for like a Purify or a single combat. It just feels really good. Right? But it also feels fair as well, because this sort of archetype is very vulnerable to certain things. Like, for example, Ionia. I feel like the more popular this deck got, the more people realize, well, if I deny their turn 3, play that we all know it's coming, this deck really struggles from that point onwards, right? So there are ways to disrupt it. There are certain weaknesses that the archetype has, but overall, I've been having a blast with it, and I love these changes. And moving from that point onwards, we're going to talk a little bit about the crowd favorite. Got a bit of a nerf, which I've definitely seen the impact of. Like I've had several games already in which I've managed to kill this thing just because of the 1 health nerf, which I think was warranted, honestly.
Yeah, I think this was them looking into a crystal ball about what the metagame might become with all of the nerfs they did, and they realized that the very aggressive Spider Swarm decks with crowd favorite might be too good. I'm happy with this nerf. Like, I think this card is really good, but it's kind of unfortunate because like it was Noxus's best card, and Noxus isn't doing very well. Yeah. So I feel bad for any Noxus lovers out there, but I think this is probably justified.
And I think the same way that the Mageseeker's got a bit of a rework treatment, I think Noxus might be looked at seriously. Maybe not right now or next week, but overall, and we're going to talk about it later, but just the perception of Noxus as a region, people hate it. I mean, no one likes Noxus. No one wants to play Noxus. No one.
Well, I love Noxus. Obviously,
you're the only one then, Mogwai.
I thought Noxus has a lot of very neat things, like Draven, one of my favorite champions. You have like the Draven Azrael deck that's doing really well. Noxus has potential for some good support for not only like Piltover but also Freljord with Ash. There's a lot of, but the thing about Noxus is that it only really shines as a support faction right now.
Yeah, I was about to say it's always the bridesmaid. It's never the bride, right? Yeah. It's like you're picking something else, and then you're like, I guess I can add Noxus to this. You're never like, all right, I want to build a Noxus deck, and then that's been my issue as well.
I don't think I've ever seen a Basilisk Rider ever. The Allegiance guy from Noxus, because
I have tried that one, and it didn't go very well. Don't do it.
All right, so Iceborne Legacy. The initial impressions of this card were very bad, but then all of a sudden we saw these Iceborne Spider decks running around. I honestly don't think too highly of the Iceborne Spiders deck. I think it's a bit overrated, personally. But still, like, Iceborne Legacy got a bit of a redesign, and it was meant to be a buff, but many perceived it to be an overall nerf due to the change to the spell speed, right? Going from burst to slow is a huge deal. We're not even talking about from burst to fast. We're going from burst to slow, and you can't even cast this it's super limited. Well, how do you guys feel about this?
Yeah, I played a lot of the previous Spider deck that was running this that popped up kind of toward the end of the patch, patch, and I loved it. I was like, Iceborne Legacy is an awesome card. Like, it was really, really like an all-star in the deck. And then I saw this and I was like, this is a huge nerf. What are they doing? And I still think it's a huge nerf. Like, people have been playing the same sort of deck, and it's just been like very underwhelming. Like, I was watching Hype play in a tournament with this deck, and he always had 5 mana up, like waiting to try and play Iceborne Legacy, but his opponent just left just enough mana up to remove whatever he targeted Iceborne Legacy with. Every time, and he like never got to cast Iceborne Legacy. It was a huge liability. So I'm really not a fan of it right now.
I think it was odd the timing as well, because no one was playing it at the beginning of the game's lifespan, I think, and then just right as it was starting to find a home, it got buffed but kind of nerfed. And also, I think it changed it from like a combat trick that was like a low value combat trick, but it had like value down the line because you're buffing multiple teams, etc. But now it's just not even a combat trick because it's slow speed. So it changed like the what it does completely, I think. And I mean, we're seeing the changes, like the deck's being run. It's still being run, like Petrify said, but it's not doing the same thing at all.
And pack mentality. This one is very interesting. I've definitely tried this card quite a bit. I still can't really tell if it's if it's terrible or if it actually has some potential for like stormy strategies. Like I tried the Iceborne Spider deck myself, right? And I initially like I put pack mentality in, and sometimes it would, you know, it would give me the game. But I've realized, at least through my own experience, that they who endure an atrocity is overall a much more reliable finisher within Shadow Isles and Freljord as a region combination. But it's still it's a cool card.
Yeah, I read this and I was like, this card's awesome. I definitely think this card has a home. We haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
So my first thing that I went to was Vladimir, with Freljord.
Yeah.
And because the issue with that deck is you get a really high attack creatures, but they never have overwhelm. So I figured this would be an excellent finisher. And I ended up hitting, I think, like top 50 with it. And I lost a couple games, and you know how the master system is. I tanked a fair bit, and I was just like, I won't try it anymore. But if anyone's listening, I'm pretty sure there's probably a really good Vladimir deck with pack mentality out there. If you can be bothered optimizing it, that's a hard part. But I'm pretty confident.
With like Stefan Skellen and stuff, right? Like these dudes that just skyrocket their attack, and because I would always like run Might in that deck, but then it was just like specifically for one unit, and they had an answer. Like this is more of like my entire board has. I figured the home for this would be a swarm deck personally. But then again, if your units are like very, very weak, then the overwhelm doesn't really come into play as much.
I was gonna say, like the most important thing about the card, I think, is the overwhelm.
Yeah.
And it benefits going tall or going like somewhere in the middle, where you still have 2 or 3 units are getting the benefit from the all allies term, while you still have power to push through the blockers. But if you're going spiders and they're at 3 or 4 attack and one blocks, then maybe you push through 5 damage. It's not doing enough for 7 mana, like not even close to enough.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I agree. No, it's interesting. Like now that you said that, I'm gonna play around with it a little bit more. So let's move on to Poro Snacks from 4 mana to 3 mana. Still not really seeing much play. I mean, I like there's certain aspects of the Poro cards that I really like. Like I like the Lonely Poro card a lot. I think as a 1-drop, it's pretty damn solid, and I also think the Poro Herder, you know, the huge fucking bicep and tricep old man guy, like I don't know if you guys seen the art, but he's like a 7-year-old dude.
He definitely lifts.
Yeah, he's like a 7-year-old man with like the biggest arm I've ever seen. He's pretty neat. Like he has a pretty strong card draw effect, right? And I think Poros could become pretty legit if more cards are released and they get like better synergy tools, because they have a really strong card draw effect already. And they have a fantastic 1-drop, in my opinion, in Lonely Poro. But unfortunately, the fluffed, it's just more of a meme card. It's always going to be a meme card as long as Will of Ionia exists. But I think I could have potential. There's a strong buff effect. Like for 3 mana, buffing all of your Poros +1, it's really strong. Like it's a big buff for sure.
As I said, like they were targeting to make it better in Expedition. I have a confession that I've lost to Poros a couple of times since the patch came out, which is always a bit demoralizing. You really reevaluate your deck when that happens. But yeah, I think this is justified. Like you said, I think they just need more cards.
Yeah. And what do you guys think? Troop of Elnox. This made me so fucking happy. Like the fact that I don't see this card anymore. You have. I know you played it a lot, Petrify. Like I saw whenever you would post a tag, you were like, "That was a Troop of Elnox."
I think, like I got the Elnox deck off of Mago. I don't know if any of the listeners know Mago. It is a very, very good Gwent and artifact player.
Yeah.
So I got the Ezreal Elnox deck off of Mago, and nobody was really playing Elnox at that point. And I tweeted it out, and then from there it just spread like wildfire.
Yeah.
And everyone was playing Elnox. So I feel a little bit responsible for that. But yeah, that card is super toxic. Like super toxic.
I think that was the point in time where it was maybe like a month and a half ago, pretty much. And I think there was like a bit of a delay between like the Masters meta that was forming at the time and like what was known as like the good stuff at the time. Like it was a 1-week delay kind of. So people weren't raiding like Ezreal decks or Elnox, and they thought like it was still a meme. And you could see like from the survey I did, it was rated like as a 3.0, which is like balanced. And the next survey I did a month later, it jumped up like 1.5 points, which is insane. Like it went up to like the most broken card in the game basically with Rekindler. So and it was the same as that card. Like the text didn't change. It was the same as that card, but people finally noticed how broken it actually was. And yeah, it got nerfed.
Yeah. I think I saw a really good tweet. I can't remember who tweeted it out, but they were like, yeah, everyone looked at Troop of Elnox and just assumed it was a meme card because they thought that Riot did the maths on it and figured out like, oh, okay, it's probably not going to be that reliable. But it turns out, like they even said in the post, they busted out the hypergeometric calculator and figured out. It's like, well, you should have done that before.
That's what I was thinking actually. Yeah,
like, I trusted you.
I despise this card. This card tilted me like nothing else did. Like it really sucked when you were invested into a match and you got some very interesting early turns going on, and then turn 5 hit and they just high rolled the hell out of this and got 2 Bull Elnox and another Troop of Elnox out, and it's just like, okay, well, I guess I lose the game, right? It really passed up Ezreal Frost's like biggest weakness too, which was, you know, lack of board presence in the mid stage of the game. It gave them a lot of like room. It definitely made the deck significantly better. And I was playing Ezreal Frost, you know, before Troop of Elnox was a thing, and I didn't even think about including it. And as soon as that deck started popping out, I was like, yeah, this is a way meaner version of it for sure.
The interesting thing is, like, it didn't even feel good to play because, like, what people didn't see was all of the times that you whiffed on the Elnox too. So it was like, fuck. Like, I hated playing it as well.
Yeah.
But I will say that the Bull Elnox is actually still quite good. Yeah. People are sleeping on it a bit. Like, in the Ezreal Frost archetype, it's still a very good card. Like, the reason why it's good right now is Chump Wump got nerfed, and Chump Wump was like the best blocker you had, right?
Yeah.
So I've been replacing Chump Wumps a lot of the time with just the 4/5 vanilla like Bull Elnox. So keep an eye out for that, I think.
Yeah. No, and that's like, while we're at it, let's talk about the Chump Wump nerf. This was massive. Like a lot of people didn't initially realize how big this was. Like I cannot, like, I would never be able to like count the amount of times that the 4 health was super relevant for this thing. Being able to trade into 3 attack units, like the 2 mana 3/2s, anything from a fearsome deck, anything from any sort of like mid-range deck in general, like this was such an efficient blocker. The fact that it could trade with a 3 attack unit and live to trade with something else made it just so damn good for any sort of pilled over deck. And some people would argue that it was kind of like an auto-include because of that, because it gave you 2 cards, right? And there was a lot of neat things that you could do with it. But now, Chump Wump at 3 health is definitely way easier to deal with. And part of me is sad because, you know, Piltover is my favorite region, and this was such a key card for it, and it definitely took a big hit.
I think it's the same with like the Spectral Riders for Hecarim when it comes to in that like 2 to 4 attack and defense range. 1 point makes such a huge difference. Like if you're telling me a card gets nerfed from 7 attack to 6 attack, that's like whatever. Like it's impactful, sure, but not really that much. Whereas from 4 to 3, in terms of blocking twice and getting 2 blocks off instead of just 1, it's huge. Same with Spectral Riders killing your unit. Now it would kill Chump Wump, where before it wouldn't if it was at 4 attack, for example, or 4 defense.
Yeah,
so yeah, it's a major difference, I think.
When something that I've learned from, you know, balancing a game myself is like the importance of breakpoints. So a breakpoint is the difference between one number essentially. So a lot of people will view health as quite linear. So like the increase from like 1 to 2 health, 3 to 4, etc. just looks like it's 1, so it's going up linearly. But it's not. Like 1 to 2 is like, you know, 100% increase, for example. Mm-hmm. And then you get breakpoints in that, okay, this removal spell is very popular in this metagame. So for instance, Mystic Shot, right, invalidates a lot of 2 health creatures. So having 3 health is actually super, super important if you want to dodge Mystic Shot in the metagame. And in the way with Chump Wump, 3 health is very, very important in a bad way because, you know, Fearsome exists and all these creatures that deal 3 attack exist. So having 4 health was a huge, huge breakpoint and a massive, massive difference. And when I first read this nerf, I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but having played with it, it's just like a huge, huge problem for PNZ. Yeah. And
the same way with removal spells as well. I mean, there's a lot that deal 3 damage, but I don't know if there's any that deals exactly 4, like other than like stuff
No,
like thermogenic beam.
just thermogenic beam. Yeah, exactly. Nothing else.
And whereas from 4 to 5, there's not a big difference. If it goes from 5 health to 4, it's almost, you're not going to notice like 95% of the time, I think. Whereas
massive.
from 4 to 3 is huge.
Yeah. Navari Conspirator is another card that got nerfed, but instead of the health stat, this guy got his attack stat lowered from 3 to 2, becoming a 2-mana 2/2. I think these constant nerfs to elusives, I don't know about you guys, but I think these address overall a bigger problem, and that is the keyword itself. I think it's going to be highly problematic as more cards that revolve around this, are released, and I feel it's going to be one of the biggest challenges Riot is going to face regarding balancing, not only from like a balance standpoint, but also from like the overall experience. Like elusives feel very, especially for more newer and intermediate players. I mean, for everybody generally, but especially for those who just get into the game and are just like learning about how to block and everything. All of a sudden they run into these decks that don't really let you block at all, and it can be pretty frustrating.
I'm gonna interrupt, Mogwai. Learning how to block. Is that a thing? Oh, let me learn how to block for what? You learn how to block for like
No.
10 games in a row?
I mean like learning how to do trades efficiently.
Like, God, okay.
Yeah, like
in a literal way, it seemed like, let's learn how to block for 10 games.
Jesus, no.
What viewers do you have, Mogwai? What kind of people are watching this podcast? Don't make these assumptions. Go on.
I do agree with what you're saying though, Mogwai. I think like in my mind, elusives have never actually been that strong, which might be a bit controversial. I see it a lot like Weather previously was in Gwent, where the better players like can deal with it and it's annoying, but it's not a huge problem. But the newer players and the intermediate players, like it's just like hell on earth dealing with elusives.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I actually think Navari Conspirator is like terrible card now, like really, really bad. Like you compare it to Greenglade Duo, which is 2 mana 2/1 and then can attack for like 5 sometimes, right? And it doesn't have to recall something. This is a 2 mana 2/2 that has to recall something. I would have preferred they just lowered the health and kept the attack at 3, but yeah, this is just a really, 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 really harsh nerf. And I also think the biggest problem with elusives is actually the entire time has been the Shadow Assassin. The problem is that's a really hard card to nerf because there's not a lot of levers to pull on it. It's just like attack and draw a card.
I mean, I've been advocating for just making it a 2/1 for a while now. I think the card would still be good. It would be more like the 2 health makes a big deal, right? It doesn't die to Vile Feast. It can chump block 1 attack creatures and still stick around. And generally speaking, it's not a card that really does anything incredible, but it's just a really solid. It's always a 3-drop play that you're happy to go for, right? Like it's drawing you a card, cycling through your deck, and it's giving you a body on the board that can either push a little bit of chip damage or serve a nice role as a key chump blocker that can also block opposing elusives, which can be really relevant as well, right? The card has pretty much become a staple in any Ionia deck, really, because it just does a lot for what you're paying for.
Even like the Mono Demacia decks, which we'll talk about in a bit, as splashing Shadow Assassin. And it's like, that's a weird card, but it makes sense, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's important to like point out like what we were mentioning earlier. Like there's a difference just because a deck is not like absolutely tier 1, and even though elusives have been deemed as tier 1 for a long time, and I would argue they are tier 1 in most cases, at least the versions that we've been seeing. It's not like they are the epitome of the archetype in Runeterra, but it's very important for the game to consider the new player and the intermediate player experience as well. And the reality is, elusives, like I deem like right now I have a couple of things that I think are problematic. Personally, I think the elusive mechanic is going to frustrate a lot of people, and maybe this is something that we could talk about later. But I'm really concerned about Karma as a card, and just for future design and just overall the experience of playing against her. Like there's some things that while a card may not be the best, the fun factor is also very important and should not be like undermined. That's my point, right? So having that said, we got a few more cards to cover. We got Flash of Brilliance, got a minor change, which now I really like personally. because now you can't just create a random like cheap spell that you can chain alongside this. And I like the fact that it's like they basically toned down the variance, which is always a nice thing. And the card is still very much strong. They also cleared. They're very set on leaving this card be for like when it comes to the burst speed and everything. They're fully aware of how powerful it is with Heimerdinger and with Lux, but they want it to be that way. They want those champions to have a strong resource like this. And at least, you know, they're upfront about it. You know, they're like not oblivious to the fact. I still think it feels pretty bad when Heimerdinger pulls like 3 Flash of Brilliance. You know, like it's kind of like that that Elnuck feeling, right? Of just like, oh, okay, he generated three drops for free, essentially. But generally speaking, I'm happy with this change.
Yeah, I'm really happy with this change because there's been so many times when my opponent has like 4 or 5 mana. They play Flash of Brilliance as like their last gasp, and you're like, fuck, what did they get? But now, like you say, okay, it's 6 costs plus, so I'm not worried anymore. And I think what's interesting about Flash of Brilliance is the amount of times it pulls Progress Day. I've like been viewing this almost as like another copy of Progress Day because there's not a ton of 6+ cards.
That's true.
So like, yeah.
I got it like a couple of times myself, like off of it, and it was like, that's something I definitely noticed.
Yeah, I think if you did the maths on like, depending on what the supporting faction is, on like the amount of times it can get Progress Day, it's actually like quite high. So yeah, I've been lowering my Progress Days because of Flash of Brilliance, which is actually quite interesting.
That's cool.
Next few cards, Rummage and Unstable Voltition, got mostly just text changes, not too different, just small.
Well, but buffed, but it's still considerable buffs. Like Rummage especially is super relevant for Jinx decks. Being able to just discard 1 card. Like a lot of times you would get stuck. Like you would draw 2 cards off of Jinx, and one of them would be a Rummage, and you couldn't really make use of it, right? This is really massive. And
that was a huge feels bad when that happened.
Yeah, and now it's just I love Jinx discard as an archetype. Like I love, you know, I've never been a huge aggro player, but Jinx discard is, I don't know, the aggro decks in Runeterra for the most part are like very interesting, highly synergistic. Whether it's spiders or discard, and particularly the discard archetype, I love it. I love playing Draven with the axes and getting all these sweet synergies going on. Because it's also pretty, it requires you need to sequence it properly. It's not an easy deck to pilot by any means, despite its aggressive nature. And, you know, patching it up a little bit by doing a subtle buff to Rummage is really neat. Like I love this change. And Unstable Voltition is a card that I've been messing around with, and you know it's not anything too crazy, but I think it has a home in a mid-range version of PNZ Demacia with Lux. Instead, because I don't believe running Heimerdinger in that deck is ideal because it messes up your curve, as you have your turn 3 6 mana play, right? Then you tap out a mana, and turn 4, you generally want to play the Insider, right? Or the Persuader alongside, you know, some spell mana backup. But if you have Heimerdinger in that deck, if you play the Insider on turn 4, you can't really play the Heimerdinger on turn 5, because you generally want to be playing Heimerdinger with spell mana backup. Now, this doesn't mean that deck is bad. Like, that deck still win games, because you know, you're playing the Mageseeker package, you got Lux and Heimerdinger, which work really well together. But ultimately, I think that deck is just the worst version of standard Heimerdinger Lux control, with Succession and other more spell-based, instead of like having your curve be awkward. And because of that, I figured I would try a more mid-range approach with the Unstable Voltition, some Judgments, Purify, and single combats. And I found really good use out of this guy. The 8 attack stat came really clutch with Judgment many times, and he applies a lot of pressure. I even ran Relentless Pursuit with him to kind of like abuse that quick attack, and it's a neat card. It's a fun card to play with, and I think it fits that archetype pretty well, and I'm very happy. I mean, it was a minor change, right? But it's more so, it more so got indirectly buffed because of the existence of this archetype now, right? Due to the changes to the Mageseekers. So
Root Awakening got a cost change as well, from 6 to 5, so a bit cheaper, and we saw kind of the Spiderling tribal deck become a thing basically. So it's kind of
big buff.
Big buff, and also an intended buff that Riot wanted people to play with spiders, not so much in an aggro package with Noxus but full spiders, and I guess it kind of worked.
Yeah, this has been one of the biggest buffs for me. I've been playing a lot of Brood Awakening decks now. Mago posted on his Twitter a deck.
I hate it. I despise it.
He hit top 10 on 2 accounts with Spider plus Karma. I've been playing a lot of that deck as well. I think I'm like 20th right now with that deck on North America. And Brood Awakening is just an all-star. It's just so good. Yeah. The ability to play it, you can play it a turn early in hour, effectively banking mana, and it's just felt amazing.
That deck is exactly why I have an issue with Karma. I hate that deck existing, because that deck is basically saying I have an early game of spiders, so I don't go down to aggro ever because I'm able to swarm the board effectively, and all I have to do is reach turn 10, have Karma on the board and a Karma in my hand that turns into an Insight of H's, and I win. Doesn't matter. Like I don't need. I just win with Karma. Like I just have Karma on the board. I start duplicating my spells. I create insane value. I have the Rekindler who just keeps bringing her back, and you can't beat that late game. And that's that deck. Because I've always stated that I believed Spooky Karma was overrated as a deck, like the standard version of Control Karma, because it was highly disruptible. It was very slow, vulnerable to aggressive decks. But this deck that Mago made just patches all the weaknesses and just really shows how obscene Karma is at turn 10. And I think I personally believe Karma is way more powerful than like any other champion in the game, and is a bigger problem than Hecarim ever was. I personally believe Karma is a huge issue, and I really think I don't know, I feel very strongly about it because I was waiting for this deck to happen. Like I told Mago, like I told him because I ran into him and he posted a deck in a Discord. And I was like, yeah, I was dreading the day somebody would come up with a deck like this that just really abuses Karma the way it does. And yeah, it's the Brood Awakening in that deck, as you guys said, like it's really strong for sure, because it also gives you, like, it's a card that you love to duplicate with Karma, right? Like you just play this and you get 2 copies of it and you just flood the board out of nowhere and get huge stats. I don't know, man. I kind of went on a bit of a ramble there, but I feel very strongly against that champion personally. I don't complain about too many cards, but I feel like Karma is a problem personally. But
yeah, I think eventually Karma's going to get hit with something. I hope it's a redesign, but we'll see.
Yeah,
I think it's also a card that at 5 mana and also I guess at 6 as well kind of takes really good advantage of the spell mana feature in Runeterra as well. I think with Remembrance it's kind of a similar thing, where there's normally spells that, I mean, removal spells especially, and certain spells at 5, 6, 7 mana. When you play them at turn 3, they're not as impactful because the value is kind of lost because the units are less health or whatever for whatever reason. But this card kind of gets the full value anyway. So I think that's also part of why it feels so strong. I think in like the early game as well.
Yeah.
Mark of the Owls got nerfed. I love this nerf. I think it was very much warranted. Mark of the Owls was just too many stats for, too little of a drawback. Yeah, you gave the unit ephemeral, but a lot of times aggro decks love this card just as a way to bypass removal and push 3 extra damage at the same time. It's not even 3, like it's the fact that you're doing both things at the same time, right? Like you're gonna Mystic Shot a 3/2 spider, they Mark of the Owls it, and all of a sudden you were supposed to be preventing 3 damage there. But not only did he prevent your removal, you're gonna be eating 6 damage to the face instead, and it was just too many stats for too little mana. And I think this nerf is great, and the card still sees some play, but I think it's balanced.
I think this is the only, like, one of the only changes I haven't seen anyone complain about. Like, it was definitely overtuned before. And the thing that I've been noticing the most with this change is in combat, if they have 2 mana open, I'm never worried about, okay, what if they cast 2 Mark of the Owls to kill me now?
Yeah.
Because, like, that's been the big difference for me. I'm like, all right, like 2 mana, it's only 4 extra damage. Then that's fine. But previously it was like 2 mana, 6 damage. Fuck.
During the patch with like when Rasa and like Ledrill, like the initial SI dominance period, there were times where you were playing the game and you were thinking, what if he has 2 or 3 Mark of the Isles and defending, defend from that possibility. and also like using Mark and then Atrocity with like a 12, like buffing a guy by 9 attack all of a sudden, it just didn't make any sense. So I think this is a nerf that everyone saw coming, and the card should have been like this from the very beginning. It had no business being a 3/3 at the start. It should have been printed as a 2/2, and that's it. And it still is played, and it's still a card that has its like little thing, you know, but obviously not a crazy +3/+3 buff. And the last change of the patch, and probably the most important, maybe for some people, the Rekindler, the cost went up from 6 to 7.
Yeah, I haven't even noticed this nerf, to be honest. Like, I'm always playing Rekindler like much later on. Like, I'm still playing this card like 3 of it. Like, you almost never played Rekindler on 6 anyway, because like previously you would play Hecarim on 6 and then Rekindler. So Rekindler was basically a 7-mana play. I don't know.
This is a perfect example, I think, mentioning before, the difference between Black Spear going from 2 to 3 and this card going from 6 to 7. And also, like, if it would have been glimpse being changed instead of, you know, you don't notice this because it's so much later that it's not as impactful. Obviously, the percentage is lower from like the point change, but also because you have so much more mana later and it's still a late game card. Whereas with Black Spear, it got completely destroyed kind of because it's from 2 to 3.
This card can be pretty disgusting, especially, you know, again, going back to Karma. This card is just pretty nutty with that. The fact that it's a summoning effect is very relevant. I honestly don't think mana tweaks nor even tweaks to the stat line itself are really going to change anything regarding the Rekindler, like unless, you know, you make it a 10 mana play or something like that. But I feel like this follower is going to become a problem as more expansions come out, more champions come out. It's going to have a heavy impact on champion design, and I think we're already seeing how strong this card can be with the likes of Karma. I think the Rekindler with Karma is borderline insane when you can get multiple copies of Karma on the board super easily. The synergy with Chronicler of Ruin is something that I honestly really like, but can be very easily abused. And it's an intriguing thing because it's a fun card. At its core, Rekindler is a very fun card. There's a lot of fun things you can do with it. Like if you're the one playing it, at least, you know, like Spectral Matron into the Rekindler from your hand. Like I said, the Chronicler of Ruin interaction is really neat, but it's so easy to abuse, man. And once you get it going, the power level is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I think a very elegant nerf they could do down the line would just be change it to weakest allied champion. That would make it a much more of a build around, because like likely at that point you're only going to have to include one champion in your deck, which makes it worse. Like for instance, that kind of ruins Rekindler in that Elise Karma deck. About. But yeah, I think this card is going to be a staple for a very long time in its current state.
Mm-hmm.
And that does it for the balance patch. I just closing thoughts on it. I don't know about you guys, but they announced this patch beforehand. You know, when they said the amount of patches they were gonna do for each, you know, set, and they kind of like defined each patch a little bit, saying that the first one was gonna be, you know, like normal sized balance changes regarding certain cards, mainly followers and spells. And then they spoke really highly of like the second patch. It was going to be the big patch, right, in which they tackled champions, all sorts of cards, redesigns. And while I was mostly very content with the changes, I'm not going to lie, I was expecting more from the supposed to be big patch. You know, like I was expecting more buffs, not necessarily more nerfs, but more cards to, I was expecting some attention to, for example, the likes of Vladimir and even Shen, which I think is deserved a bit of a buff. I think his nerf back in the day was a bit unwarranted. So I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I definitely was expecting a little bit more from this.
Yeah, I was also thinking they would maybe change Vladimir, Shen, and Yasuo. Because they were talking about changing champions. A lot, and I think the patch was very good from like a changing the metagame perspective, but I think our expectations were higher, but I still think they did a really good job. That's the thing. But yeah, I just thought that there would be more changes to champions as well.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that from what they've promised until now and what they've delivered, I think anyone that's playing at a very high level and kind of has a very good feel for balance and knows what's broken in the game, what's actually broken, and what needs to be fixed. I think there's not anything disappointing. Like everything that there's no like weird stuff getting nerfed or buffed where you think like, what are these people thinking? Like you don't, and that's happening with a lot of different games that I've played.
Yeah.
Patches have come out and I've questioned my own life. Like what is this real life? Like is this happening right now? But in this case, I think everything makes sense and it's coherent and it's reasonable to some extent. And you might not like some things a little bit, but there's nothing crazy happening where something's getting like nerfed to oblivion and like never being played again. So in that, I think that's a very positive thing going forward. Maybe they don't want to take as many risks right now with changing, 5 or 6 champions all of a sudden in one patch, because obviously some changes might have different consequences in the meta, and then things can shift while people play new decks or discover new strategies. But overall, I think they're maybe playing it safe. Even as it was going to be like the big patch of this kind of expansion or 3-month period, it might still be like they're not going to do things that are too risky. They changed Kalista completely, so I want to kind of just do a few things now, and then maybe like the next patch they'll do like bigger reworks as well. Yeah, as like get a feel for how the nerfs and buffs impact the meta, and get a feel for how kind of the meta shifts with people playing the new changes basically.
I also like the lack of a reckless approach. It's important to know, like we've all been around card games for a while, and we've seen like reckless balance changes in the past and such. And I like that they're not going crazy with it, and I love the fact that they include a well-spoken like line of reasoning for each change. I find that I personally really like that.
Yeah, the only big question mark for me was the Iceborne Legacy this patch.
Yeah,
like that was the big one where I was like, wait, is this really seen as a buff? Yeah. Aside from that, that was a great patch.
Right, so we're gonna move on to the survey results. You can talk a little bit about that, Panda, because you're the expert here.
All right, so for people that don't know, for the very first balance patch, which happened a month and a half ago, I decided I was kind of thinking about talking to some high elo players or like master players and kind of get their feel for what cards they thought were broken and kind of their suggestions to fix them, just from purely a curiosity perspective. I just wanted to know what ideas people had and suggestions to try and fix certain cards. And that eventually evolved into making kind of a more wide survey for the community in general that basically asks people to rate a few things from 1 to 5 on a scale from either 1 is very poorly balanced and 5 is very balanced for when you're talking about regions and thematic satisfaction. And then for champions and cards, 1 is weak and 5 is too strong. So ideally, in a perfect world, every card is a 3. And they're all perfectly balanced, although everyone knows that there's going to be some cards that are going to be more leaning towards 4, going to be strong but still fair, and some cards that will be a bit more memey or a bit more weak, and that's fine as well. But ideally, you don't want any cards from in the 1 to 2 range or the 4 to 5 range. So we're not talking about the first survey I did, which was a month ago, but for this patch, basically I'm releasing these surveys a few days before the patch happens, so you can kind of get a feel for what community thinks needs.
By the way, the link for the Reddit post will be in the description in the video down below, in case you guys want to check it out directly. You'll have it there.
So we'll be talking overall the general balance in terms of what people think about the game's balance in general, and diversity of decks went up from the very first patch to this last patch. So overall, this last month, or from 2 weeks from now, the last month was a more positive game in general for people. People liked it more. The meta overall was better. And that's after the nerfs to Rasa and Ledros, where SI was really, really dominant. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And in terms of regions, Shadow was still considered the strongest region with a 4.45, so very, very high. And then I only had a 3.89, and then everything else was kind of near the middle with Noxus at a 2.3. So like I mentioned before, it's considered the weakest region, and it's also the region that people are less satisfied to play. So they don't identify with the archetypes. They don't identify with themes in general. It has a 2.3, so also very, very low, which is why I think Riot eventually has to look at the region and to say, what can we change for people to want to play this? People to open a champion from Noxus or get a champion from Noxus and say, hey, I'm going to build a deck around this guy. I'm going to be excited to do it. Whereas now, according to, 1,000 responses from the community in general, it doesn't seem to be the case at all.
And then we got the regional archetype and thematic satisfaction. with Piltover and Zon at the top, but a lot of these did they remain the same like as before?
They all went down.
They all went down.
Which is, I mean, there was about 1,000 responses for each of the surveys, so the sample size is pretty high.
Yeah.
They all went down by a little bit, but again, 0.10, so not by much.
Yeah.
Ionia went up. I think that's because it wasn't only Elusives being played, so it had a bit of a broader with like the spell-based decks, and that made, and so it's really cool also seeing how you can see right away why these changes happen from month to month. So I think this is a cool like introspective way of seeing how the meta shifts and people are happier playing Ionia decks that aren't just Elusives basically.
Yeah, you can also note here in the champions that like people already are pretty aware of how strong Karma is. Like Karma number 2 right there. Like it's not like, you know, a hot take or anything. Like she's definitely by all sorts of
in my mind, I agree a lot with the champions one, where Karma and Ezreal at the moment are my biggest design problems.
You think Ezreal more so than Heimerdinger? And I love Heimerdinger, but I do sometimes feel like he can be like from a design. I think
Heimerdinger is like reasonable. I like there's always an answer. You know, at the very least, you can just kill all of the turrets he makes. Like he generates a ton of value, but like, you know, if you're playing against a Heimerdinger deck and you have removal in your deck and you're not saving it for Heimerdinger, you're doing it wrong, right?
Yeah.
I think Heimerdinger is fine in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, I have no issue with him, but Ezreal, I take a lot of issue with the design of it as far as
how because of the lack of interaction when he goes off. You mean with the burst spells or
exactly.
What I really like about Ezreal though is like you gotta work for him. You know, like you gotta like I love the fact that the deck is centered around, you know, like there's this like quest that you have to complete, and it's not really as easy as it would seem. Like eight targeted units is, you know, can be quite the ordeal, right? So it's kind of like a payoff that you're spending the entire match working for. And what I really like about Ezreal is how Ezreal decks play very differently from other like more standard mid-range builds, right? I don't know. I like the design a lot, and I wouldn't want it to be changed. Like if Ezreal would have to be nerfed in any way, I would definitely prefer a more of a numbers approach, right? Because I like how it plays. I don't know, but I don't know how you feel about it. But I like the fact that it's a different. You can tell it's a different strategy than the usual.
Yeah, I like that it's a different strategy. But my issue is like the entire game is built around interaction, and Ezreal kind of breaks that rule, where it's like, okay, now you lose, and like you can't respond to any of the burst things going on. Especially like the Ezreal Karma deck. That's just like 2-in-1 of problems. But yeah, I'm just not a huge fan of the way that Ezreal was designed to end the game at instant speed or burst speed. That's my problem with it. Okay. Like if it was like fast spells, that'd be fine. But yeah,
there's a certain point when you're on turn, 7 or something like that, and you're not on the board, or what you're seeing visually, you're not even close to losing. But then you suddenly say, okay, I guess it's over now, and then the turn passes, and then boom, 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 and then you're dead.
Yeah.
And that feels bad. I mean, because you have full control of the board, of the game, and then all of a sudden, because they complete the quest, very hard quest, target all these units, that's it. You just lose immediately, So I think it does feel bad to play against. And I think you can see right away, apart from Hecarim, which is obviously was a problem and it got nerfed, and it's you could see right away what the problem was with Hecarim. It's just very overstated. The next 3 champions, Karma, Ezreal, and Heimerdinger, have an insane value cap. Like the value you can get from them is insane. Every other champion and everything else in the game, for the most part, you have these stats, you have these different factors that are changing these stats in certain ways with certain archetypes, but that's all there is to it. It's a body with stats, but Karma, Ezreal, and Heimerdinger do things that no other champion even dreams of doing, in terms of what value they can put, and they take complete control of the game. If you complete certain, other, the Ezreal quest, etc., or Karma, you have to be level around 10 and have this mana and be able to defend her from being removed, etc. But once that happens, if you have those answers, it's over. Yeah. Like it's the value you get from them is completely insane, and I think that's why they're you can see right away it's their 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in the strength ratings, and I think they're all problematic champions going forward.
I still for me, Karma and Ezreal are pretty separate. I don't know. Like I stand behind what I said with Ezreal. Like I feel like I liked champions like Ezreal, like Fiora, that provide alternate play patterns or win conditions. But I do definitely see the issue with the lack of interaction with burst speed spells pinging at you, right? That definitely does feel bad. But I definitely don't feel anywhere near the amount of despair and frustration when it comes to facing an Ezreal deck or a Karma deck. Like when Karma hits turn 10 and she just starts vomiting value, man, back to back, just not running out of cards ever. It's pretty demoralizing. Ezreal, I don't know. Yeah, but I understand what you guys are saying. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing for me is like Karma vomits value, but like I still feel like I have a little bit of hope. But when it's like Ezreal's turn, I'm just dead. Like that's the thing for me that's the problem.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right, so
looking at the rest of the list for champions, I mean, maybe Zed you can consider somewhat problematic as well. I mean, obviously you can see, you know, it's not a problem, but it's a strong card, of course, and it's a card that's hard to deal with at, you know, turn 3, etc. So it's up. It's at 3.62. And Anivia went up as well. I guess this was the meta where War Mother Control became a thing, and especially the first 2 weeks, it wasn't impressive, but it was definitely a strong deck, and people maybe had a hard time dealing with it and thought, you know, certain parts of the deck were broken or whatever. At least not at a very high level, but towards like maybe Platinum, Diamond, people have more problems dealing with those things. Then the rest of the champions are just, I mean, Elise, Fiora, Ashe, Garen. They're all just good champions, but obviously not anywhere near problematic. They're just okay.
I'm surprised to see Draven so low. I think Draven is a great champion.
He did go up a bit, and Teemo as well. I guess with Teemo was played more with PNZ with the changes, and also with just Elusives even. I think it was splashed into like the Wayfinder in some decks. At least I tried it for a bit as well. But the biggest, I mean, Lux, because she got changed in the patch.
Oh, that's a big.
A 1 point increase from 2 to 3, so she went from not playable really to right on average. So I think that was a very, very good buff. And Karma as well went up a full point from 3 to 4, which goes from like balanced, okay, playable, to very, very strong and obviously second on the list.
Speaking of champions that I love, like their design, I love Lux, man. I love playing Lux. I think she's strong, but she's fair. And I love everything about that champion. Like, I think it's the epitome of, like, you know, design when it comes to champions in this game.
Yeah,
I
mean,
love
the community
Lux.
agrees with you because it was at a 2-point rating, which people weren't very happy with it at all. And then that buff made it jump up to exactly like a 3.02, which means people think
clean. On
average, it's like exactly like a very balanced and a fair champion. So I think it's just a great example of that.
I think this really highlights like what we were saying before when we were like saying we expected more. Like you look at the ones that were low, like Katarina, Braum, Shen, Vlad, Yasuo, and even Kalista. Like kind of was expecting all of them to see some sort of attention. Like I didn't even think of Braum and Kat when we were talking about it before, but those two as well. Like
I think Braum, even the big difference was that initially it was played in a lot of elusive decks at the beginning, and it had. And I mean, it's funny because these surveys and this like kind of with a big enough sample size, it provides a very clean view into like what the community thinks. And it, you know, Braum suddenly stops being played in elusive decks. He jumps down half a point. And it's 100% because of that reason, for example.
And the only reason we were playing Braum in elusive decks was because of other elusive decks.
Yeah.
Like we were trying to like, you know, pull away their defender so we can get in without elusives as well, which was funny.
All right, so I guess we can move on to some pretty big news regarding the economy. Because, you know, we were talking about patch 0.92.
There's also the list of cards. You're going to go over it as well. The problematic cards that.
Oh yeah, sure.
Like, I mean, those big nerfs like Elnex and Rekindler, etc.
Of course.
Kind of the expectations from what people thought. So obviously at the top of the list, the Rekindler was the biggest after the Rasa and that patch a month and a half ago. This last patch 2 weeks ago, going into it, people were complaining the most obviously about Rekindler spawning kind of infinite Hecarims, getting huge value from it. Obviously, Hecarim was a big part of that as well. It was not just a Rekindler by itself, but yeah, it's till now it's been the most complained about card, let's say, out of 4.6 out of 5. That's pretty fucking high.
Wow. Yeah.
And it had a 1 point increase from the last patch without the card being changed at all. And Jewel
Damn.
Elnuck just second.
1.4.
The card also didn't change at all, and it went up 1.4. So it just goes to show that certain cards, even without changing the text at all, but because they find a certain spot in the meta, they become very prevalent. People suddenly see them as a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about a lot about the Rekindler at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's nutty, and it's gonna be nutty, and it's gonna get nuttier, and we're gonna see how Riot approaches it, because I just think ultimately they'll have to do something about the design. It's just so abusable. But I also understand the fun aspect of the card. Like, it's a hard one to tackle, because I do feel like the Rekindler is a very satisfying card to play. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels really good, but.
I'm glad this list highlights like the top card that didn't get nerfed in this list. In my mind, is something that will get nerfed down the line, which is Standalone. I hate that card.
I despise it. Yeah,
it's a high rollers card that's like just built to be frustrating.
Yeah.
I think eventually it's going to get nerfed, but I do expect it to go down, because right now there isn't an amazing standalone deck. I hit top 20 standalone deck. I posted on my Twitter. Shameless plug. But I think the card down the line will get nerfed. Same with Relentless Pursuit. I also think those two cards are going to get nerfed eventually.
Well, is Relentless Pursuit even in this list? It's number 12. Okay, yeah. I definitely I think a lot of people don't realize just how bonkers Relentless Pursuit is as a card. It's so powerful for 3 mana. I remember like a lot of players like noticed really early on how I believe like you, Panda, like when you were laddering with your Elusive decks early on in the open beta, you were like talking about like, yeah, guys, this card is actually kind of crazy. It wins me a lot of games. And
no one was running in. I added 1
Yeah.
because I thought it would be too awkward to add more. And then I talked with Petrify, and I think Mago also started playing. I think they got to Masters or Diamond when that was like a thing back then with that deck. And they're like, why are you only playing 1? I'm like, maybe you're right. And then it became 3 of like in every deck after that. So it was like, I thought initially it would be a bit awkward, but it just, it's a very strong card.
Yeah, I hit Masters when there was like, I think I was like the 14th person to hit Masters, and I did it with the 3 of Relentless Pursuit Elusive deck. It was silly. Very silly.
And I agree. Standalone into like Solitary Monk feels, oh my god, it feels so bad. It just It's
not even like Solitary Monk that's the problem either. Like you can get standalone onto Zed, you can get standalone onto a Shadow Assassin. It's like any of those cards are just like fuck my life.
Yeah.
It is good to see though that out of this list here, I mean, standalone is the one card that's not even being looked at in theory, but Glimpse Beyond, which is the 5th card, Frenzy Skitter, which is the 6th card, and Shadow Assassin, which is the 8th card, are all on the watch list. So the devs do know that these cards are problematic, and there's clearly the community also deems them as problematic as well. So there's people are aware of this stuff. Boom Crew Rookie, not the flashes of cards, but I mean it is a very, very strong card for
it's a fantastic 2-drop,
and what it does. So
it's definitely the best aggro card in the game, hands down. I don't even think it's close. It's so far beyond
the high health stat makes it such a good target for buffs too. Like it loves, like Bunker Rookie just loves Brothers Bond and all sorts of like it's so resilient. It's hard to just pick off the board. It's fantastic. It's such
guaranteed 2 damage. It's just like
it's great.
And whereas Chump Wump got nerfed, whereas it was a strong card but fair, I guess.
Yeah.
This is also a card that I think falls into that even more so on the not so fair side compared to Chump Wump. So I think it's going to get maybe a similar treatment.
I actually believe Boom Karuki falls into like this, very specific area of like, it's very powerful. It's clearly above average, especially compared to the 2-drops, but it's fine. Like it's the strong kind of fine. Maybe you guys don't agree, but I think it is.
Essentially, the rating system for this survey is from 1 to 5, and the way I expected it to turn out would be that cards that were over a 4 in rating are cards that needed to get nerfed for the community. Again, this is all the perception of Reddit in terms of balance, so it's not always going to be like something that's above 4 needs to get nerfed. It might just be a card that on paper seems very strong but really isn't, or it's fine, whatever. But for most of these cards, the cards that are above 4, they all got nerfed. Troop, Rekindler, and Mark of the Isles, whereas everything under 4, from 3.8 to 4 is what you're saying, Mo. It's that range where they're very strong. They might get nerfed, but if they don't get nerfed, they're not breaking the game either. So it's kind of okay, like Standalone, Glimpse Beyond, Frenzy Skitter.
Yeah, I'm expecting if we ever have a long sustained period of a metagame where aggro is dominant, the Boom Crew rookie will get a nerf. But until that happens, it won't, obviously.
Yeah, I think no one's gonna complain about it, but if it does get nerfed, no one's gonna be like, "Oh, this is unwarranted," or "This card was like it's." It'll be like, "Okay, it's fine." Like Chump Wump, I think, is a perfect example of that category.
All right, let's talk about the economy. There was another big patch following the balance patch, patch 0.93, which has some heavy changes to the economy system. The two big ones that I'm going to point out here are the lack of limits on wildcard purchases and the unlimited experience that you can now have access to. So they removed the limits on both these things, and I think these changes are absolutely massive, especially at least for the content creators and overall the presence of the game on Twitch. I believe the wildcard change is really big, because this set away or pushed away a lot of big streamers who decided to like not really commit to the game because they wanted to be able to build any deck immediately, right? Like there were a lot of people who fell on this boat. And now this goes far beyond just content creators. Like this enables anybody to be able to catch up to others building their collection if they want to, if they're less patient. But I also don't think it's fair to like look at this and be like, okay, so this is something that only benefits whales or people who spend money in the game. Because the reality is, if you look at all these changes, like as if Runeterra was not already free-to-play friendly enough, it's kind of insane at this point with all these changes and just how easily you can build a collection. Like compared it to any other card game right now, at least any other like super relevant one, and it's pretty neat. I don't know.
So the way that Runeterra was designed, economy-wise, it was designed around retention. So what retention means is if someone plays on one day, what are the odds they're going to play on the 7th day and the 30th day, etc. Right? That's why they have those like effectively like 30-day quests in terms of regions, and then they have daily quests, and then they have the weekly quest with the vault. Like that's one way to look at it, right? So they've designed the entire game around someone who starts on day 1 to keeping them on to day 30, and they did an amazing job with that for when we all started, when the game first unlocked, right? But they had this long-term problem that they've addressed in this patch, where if someone was starting out fresh, like 25 days into that cycle or now, they're so far behind everybody else because they're completely gated, right? So any of the new players that were starting now, the retention wouldn't have been working because they have one shot effectively to build a good meta deck before they have to wait another week, right, to do it. So if they had built a really bad deck in that first week or the meta had shifted, they're now stuck playing this really bad deck. So that would have been hurting their retention long-term for anyone who wasn't in that initial wave. So they've kind of corrected that by giving them the option to purchase more wildcards if they want to spend more money, or just that unlimited experience cap. So I was wondering how they would address that problem when they first released this system. And this appears to be the way that they have done that. So that's my perspective from like a game design style.
We even mentioned it in like the first episode that there's like the wildcard limit is super short-sighted because you're launching the game, everyone's playing it. Sure, for that first batch of players, everything makes sense. But once the game comes out, or once someone picks it up 6 months from now, and they can only buy 3 champion wildcards in a week, what are they supposed to do? Like play that one archetype when there's a 40 or 50 champion? I don't know how they're going to do rotation and stuff, but it's just super limited, and it made no sense. And obviously they're not really profiting because you're buying wildcards that you know exactly what you want to buy. So it's a much more fair model, even though there is more of like a whale issue, I guess you could say. But still, it's so generous that I played. I mean, the past 2 weeks I haven't played as much. I haven't been grinding like the vaults as I was before. But for a month and a half or 2 months, if you played daily and you played and did your vaults, etc., you have almost all the cards. So it's really not that slow. So there's not this big gap between like whales being able to suddenly spend so much more money on wild cards and get ahead of you. Like it's not the case at all. You can still build after a month. You could basically build any top tier meta deck that you want.
Yep.
You know, maybe not like 10 different decks, but 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty fair thing when you're looking at like competitive decks and trying to play at the high end of the ladder without spending any money, like being a free to play player.
I think this is peak when it comes to free to play friendly environment. Like it takes you what, like 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks to like actually build close to a full collection.
Yeah. If you're only aiming to do one meta deck, it doesn't take that long. Like if you really play seriously and you do your vaults, etc., like after a few days or a week, you can build like a
I'm referring to like the ability to build multiple decks. Like once once it's been like 3 weeks and a half, you can basically build any deck you want at that point, pretty much. Yeah. And we're talking about like a free to play experience. Like this is pretty unheard of, really. And it's huge.
The reason that Riot can actually do this is because it's Riot, right?
Yeah,
It's not like they're relying on Runeterra as their main source of income or anything like that. Like, you know, you look at like Magic the Gathering or anything like that. Like that's it, right? That's the income for Arena, right? That's the income for their products. Like they're not going to be able to, you know, make it as free to play friendly as this. Yeah. Which is why, you know, Runeterra has been able to do this model, is because this is like a side project that is just probably like it started for fun, like that sort of thing. Like, don't get me wrong, they're probably wanting to make a profit like every business does. But it's not like they need to be, you know, getting a lot of money from this. Whereas, you know, other companies aren't as fortunate to be as big as Riot to do that. So, you know, it's been really interesting to see. And I'm curious how this works out for them long term. Like long term, the longevity of Runeterra's profit. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see like its profit and loss statements, but I'd be very curious.
Yeah, I think the margins are much more lenient in terms of what they can do and how generous it can be, and yeah, the point they have to meet economically isn't as strict as other companies that are, like you said, much more leaning towards like running a business side of things and not so much providing kind of a different way to interact with like the League of Legends universe, I guess you could say, and just a card game format, because that's essentially what Runeterra and TFT and all these like side products they're launching are. I guess Valorant is a completely different thing, but the ones that are linked to the Runeterra universe and like the League of Legends lore, it's kind of like I think just different ways to interact with the same kind of big product, which is League of Legends and kind of that universe. Yeah,
they're definitely trying to build a universe where they can get people to move toward playing League of Legends or interacting with. They're trying to build like the Disney of video games, right? Where, you know, one person like just lead into another thing. Yeah. So they have the luxury of, you know, TFT and all of that just being like completely free, which is, you know, it's very, very like good spot to be in if you're Riot.
So that's I think that's a good moment to move on to like the last portion or the last subject that we're going to talk about, and that is basically the future of Runeterra. When I came up with this subject, it's pretty obviously broad, like it's not specific, but I kind of wanted to talk with you guys about things that you would like to see in the game, or things that you feel like Runeterra needs before like actual official release. Because I personally believe that while the game is in a pretty amazing state right now in regards to it, considering it's a beta, right? I still feel like there's a lot of things lacking that they have to, you know, start incorporating. Like they've spoken a lot about multiple game modes, which is something I'm very excited for. I think that's one of the things that MTG Arena has really failed to capitalize on or implement themselves, when Magic the Gathering actually enables you to play. You can play Magic the Gathering in many different ways, right? And I'm very intrigued for that. I definitely want the spectator mode, tournament, incline game tournament mode as well. I think these things are necessary, and I don't know. I'm excited for them to be implemented, but I also really do wish that this happens before the game is actually officially released. What do you guys think, like regarding this, like just in general, the future?
Yeah, I think they need to build a lot more infrastructure to allow the community to support itself. So things like, like you said, spectator mode, tournament mode, basically like a lot of the things that Artifact had actually.
Yeah,
that, Runeterra doesn't have, which is kind of funny in a way. They were like the opposite ends on both. Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other episode. But yeah, so I think they need to add a lot more ways for the community to support itself. Like we've seen some community run tournaments, but it's very awkward to do right now without like spectator mode and like tournament brackets and stuff like that. The other thing that I really think that they need to do and they're aware of is fix the way that the master system works, which is definitely
they're definitely aware of this. I can like vouch. Yeah, my English sometimes. I can confirm this is like I've actually spoken with the lead designer not too long ago, and this is definitely one of the questions that I threw at him, and it's definitely they're well aware that it's a mess right now, like the Masters rank system. Apparently, like what happened is they kind of like took the because if you guys remember at first when you reached Master rank, it took a long time to like you had to like play several games to like actually change a rank.
Yeah.
So they noticed this and they basically pulled the lever all the way to the other side. So now it's like there's a huge flux, but they're aware of this. Yeah.
So there's this thing in ELO systems called the K factor, which is basically how variant your rank changes is, and it would have been really, really tiny to begin with, and then they probably just like increased it by
they just cranked it all the way. Like that's what they told me. They just took the lever to the other side, and now it's just kind of it's wild, man. It's just like you lose, especially when you're like in between like top 100 and top 200. Like and when you're in 100 and something, then all of a sudden you lose a game and you drop 200 ranks and you're in 300. And then you lose another game and you're 600, and you're like, Jesus, like I lost like 2 games, and now I'm like all the way here.
And part of the problem is there's no MMR decay, so you get a lot of people who like went up to like Masters and hit it and then just left, right? So like you will see like people that are like top 20 that haven't played in like 3 weeks, and it's like
I didn't know. I didn't know there was no MMR decay. Honestly, like I didn't focus on that. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a big problem because it means like you've got all these people who aren't actually playing in Masters that are making the rank swing even more.
Yeah, that's a huge problem actually. That has to be fixed. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think right now you could see it. Well, when I mentioned first what Petrify said about Artifact and Runeterra being 2 different things. When I was reading the patch notes yesterday for like the economy and the progression, I'm like, this sounds like exactly what Artifact didn't do any of this. Like they're tackling all of it. And retention and all this stuff that Artifact's just like, well, I guess we don't have to do any of this. Let's just make, good tournaments, whatever. And yeah, like you said, but it's missing I think everything that us from our perspective, which is not obviously the general player base. So a lot of what we say and what we think, I think is going to be biased towards like the very high end of competitive players and people that want to run tournaments or cast tournaments or play in tournaments.
How good was the in-game tournament client for Artifact? Like this game would, oh my god, it would be so good. It needs to happen. It needs to.
That's why a lot of streamers and top players were generally very happy with how Artifact was, but they weren't happy. The rest of the player base wasn't, and that's why it failed. Whereas Runeterra, I think, is the opposite. Like it's a very, the fundamentals are there. Like the progression system, the game is good. The fundamental system, how it works is all good, but it's missing just features that I think are very easily added later on. So they're building kind of the base first, and they're going to add on things after. When, I'm not sure, but I think it's like Petrify said, it's a huge thing once you get a tournament system and kind of like integration between competition and the actual game and having like a client for that. I think MTGA does that very well, where there's qualifiers for like big events in the client itself. And that makes it super easy and just anyone can get into it. You can qualify from like, I think it's getting a certain spot on the Mythic ladder, then you qualify for this qualifier like tournament on the weekend. So I think it's just very well done. And once Runeterra fixes the master system, the ladder system, and adds these certain features, I think it's going to be a great, esports game, I guess you could say. But I think there's still like a few months for that at least.
And the other thing is like from like if I'm putting like a game director hat on as like the person who was leading Runeterra right now, those features aren't actually super high priority because the player base that cares about it is so small.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like they're going to be building out like, fun game modes and all that stuff first.
Yeah.
For the people that are, the big portion.
Yeah.
And, like that sucks for us. But, maybe for the longevity of the game, it's the best thing to do.
Yeah, it's the healthy thing.
And like something I wanted to talk about briefly is the quality of the development of Runeterra is so impressive from a technical perspective. And the one thing I want to point to define that is so brushed over when people talk about Runeterra is the eye feature in game. Like, that is so hard to do from a technical perspective.
Really?
Yeah, like extremely, extremely difficult. And they have absolutely nailed it. And like,
wow,
that gives me like a lot of confidence that the people working on the game like are very technically sound and can implement things like tournament mode and all that stuff, very easily if they wanted to. It's just a matter of prioritization. Yeah. So yeah, I'm quite bullish when it comes to like the long-term features that are going to be implemented in Runeterra. But yeah, it's just it's something that we would rather sooner than later because we want to be competing in those tournaments, right? We want to be winning, big money and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mentioned I think it's a perspective thing specifically. Like I mentioned in the first episode of the podcast as well, whereas a lot of players maybe a few weeks ago were already kind of down on the game and they thought the game was already getting stale or it was a dead game, whatever. But it's because you're looking at it from the perspective of someone that just has spent a month playing 10 hours every day and grinding every deck possible and playing their whole life just in Runeterra, whereas the average player plays 1 or 2 hours a day and he couldn't be happier. Like he's just smiling, playing all his fun decks and having a great time, and he has no idea that there's people that can even conceive that the game is dead. Like he's in a completely different like cloud or bubble. Yeah, I think that's like the majority of the player base is in that bubble as well, so that's why it doesn't worry me, or I don't think like you said, it's a priority thing, I think, for the most part.
No, I definitely agree with you guys regarding like the priorities having to be the game modes. I think especially considering how we've spoken about this like in the prior episode of the podcast, the state of card games and how things are not the same as they were when Hearthstone was released, right? And I think just like other genres, card games have to evolve as well. And the best way to do that is to implement multiple ways to play the game. You have a card pool, but there's several different ways you can do it. And I definitely do think that has to be the priority over these other more competitive components that, would be great, but generally speaking are not as urgent as, just have like, I'm really intrigued to see like what kind of game modes they come up with, right? Because that's, in a way you kind of have to like redesign a new game every time you're, because it's definitely, it must be challenging. Like, I'm not a developer, but it definitely must be a challenging ordeal, but it's something that I'm excited for. I really want to see what they come up with.
Yeah, I think like timed events with different like specific rewards for that event and different themes and stuff, it's something that we definitely might see going forward. And like Petrify said, with the eye feature and with also the spell mana, for example, being saved, I think there's a lot of innovation. And when a game comes out originally, it's going to innovate, but there's certain risks that you maybe don't want to take right away because you don't want to, it's too risky and it might not work out and it might just be too much. But I think as the game evolves and the game development goes forward, they're going to try and different things that might change card games altogether, like the same way that I think in a lesser way the spell mana and the eye feature and stuff, but there's still very innovative things that we haven't seen in card games for the past 10 years, and it's a lot of time where no one has done or thought to do anything like that. And I guess Artifact as well innovated with like the initiative system and the back and forth where Runeterra kind of not copied it, but has
but it took it. It was a great facet to take. It was
and it was a general like leap forward for the genre as a whole, and I think we might see a lot more of that with Runeterra specifically compared to other card games.
Yeah, so that's I think that's pretty much it. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really excited for the future of this game, and I think for the most part it's had a really strong start. Obviously people will point out, oh, the viewership in Twitch isn't all that great, yada yada yada. But I think ultimately what truly matters is the quality of the game, and I think it's doing really well in that sense. I've been playing nonstop ever since the open beta came out, and I haven't been burned out like at all. And that's not common with me when I focus on a game so much for 1 or 2 months. And I know, I for one know Mark has been playing quite a bit as well. Like I said, he made it to number 1 in the NA ladder. He's been constantly up there in rank, but also just as often complaining and whining about the Masters rank system on Twitter.
Yeah, it started for me as like a research thing. Like part of my job is to look at like competitors and what they do, but I'm still someone who wants to compete in like these $1 million tournaments and stuff like that as well. So yeah, I've been playing a lot at night, just keeping an eye on what Runeterra is doing, but as well as like if there are any esports stuff, I want to be competing. So it's been fun for me.
And yeah, that's basically it. If you guys want to give any sort of shout outs or anything, I'll start it off by saying check out Panda, check out Petrify. I'll have all the links to all their stuff in the description down below. Make sure to check that out. And yeah, you guys shout yourselves out a little bit. Talk about yourselves.
Small mention I want to make is that with the whole like survey thing, when I did it initially, I kind of put the thought of doing it every big balance patch, so not every patch, because some patches like the one this week were mostly economy and progression, and there wasn't actually any changes to cards. But every month, right before, it would just to have a comparison of like what the community thinks needs to be nerfed and what actually developers end up nerfing, and that insight and having that data is always, I think, for me, very interesting, and a lot of people kind of agree with it, I guess. So if you're interested in participating and you haven't heard about it yet, every month, so before every big balance patch, the weekend before, if you check the subreddit, you'll probably find the survey there. So you can participate, you can vote, you can give suggestions if you want, which some are very funny. I read over them, and their Reddit is great.
Reddit is Reddit.
Leave it at that.
Yeah.
But you can participate, and it'll be on Twitter as well, my Twitter, if you want to check it out there. But yeah, every month, so a few days before the balance patch, you'll be able to participate in that.
And just so we clarify, the subreddit, the Legends of Runeterra. All right, just search
r/Legends of Runeterra.
There you
go.
It's important. I didn't even know what Reddit was until like a few years ago. How about you?
Yeah, for me, just thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed talking about card games. It's obviously my job as well. So please follow me on Twitter, which I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere. And if you're interested in the game I work on, Gods Unchained, feel free to ask me any questions on Twitter, and I'm happy to talk about it.
All right, sweet. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Mark, for pulling him for Merchant. We'll keep our thoughts with him as he recovers. And that's all I gotta say. Hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. And we're gonna make this a bi-weekly thing. So I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. And I was waiting for me to say this. Like, don't forget.
Don't forget to say it. Remind them. But essentially, after every patch, in theory, if things go as planned, you should expect a podcast being uploaded right after every patch. So if it uploads on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, like in that area.
There you go. Information. Very important. Have a good one, guys. Hope you enjoyed. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.